I canceled their flights with one text. No warning. No explanation. Just a clean, irreversible click, while they were already standing in line at the airport security checkpoint. They thought I was in the restroom. I was actually outside the terminal, watching the screen where their flight number blinked next to on time. I knew I had about 17 minutes before they'd find out. It wasn't rage that drove me to do it. It wasn't some impulsive tantrum. This wasn't revenge. It was something colder, sharper. It was clarity. After nearly 3 decades of emotional gymnastics, after a lifetime of shrinking myself to fit into their version of family, I finally realized something. I didn't owe them my peace just because we share DNA. But before you judge me, before you think this is some bratty millennial meltdown, let me ask you something. What would you do if the people who raised you couldn't be bothered to show up for your 16th birthday because they had a family trip planned? What would you do if that family trip didn't even include you? Let me back up. I know this sounds extreme. I'm not the villain in some Netflix drama. I'm not proud of the way it ended, but I'm not sorry either. Because that one text, that was 29 years in the making. That was every missed birthday, every fake apology, every moment I was gaslit into believing I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. And that morning at the airport, as my mother scrolled through Instagram, pretending not to notice I was avoiding eye contact, and my father complained about the airline's lack of professionalism, I realized they still didn't see me. Not as an adult. Not as a human being. Not even as their daughter. Just a box to check. A seat to fill. A convenient prop in their never-ending theater of appearances. So I walked. I walked out of that terminal like someone leaving the scene of a quiet crime. No baggage, metaphorical or otherwise. Just my passport, my wallet, and my phone in my pocket. And the knowledge that for the first time in my entire life, I had chosen me over them. I remember standing outside the airport, looking at the sunlight bleeding across the pavement, and feeling my chest rise with something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. I pulled up the booking app. Our flights were under my account, booked using my points. I tapped on their reservation. 2 names stared back at me, Carla Merrick and David Merrick. My parents, my architects and arsonists. I hovered over the cancel button. For half a second I hesitated. Because we're taught, aren't we? Especially daughters. We're taught to be gracious, to forgive, to keep the peace, to sacrifice for family, even when family is the one holding the knife. But I didn't flinch this time. I didn't second guess. I hit cancel, then I texted both of them, just one message, sent to our family group chat, knowing full well they'd read it right there in the terminal, probably surrounded by strangers, already agitated about the boarding line. The message said, "You canceled my birthday for a family trip. Today, I canceled your trip for my peace." That was it. No call, no fight, no screaming match in the car, no dramatic farewell at the gate. Just a quiet exit. My exit. And if you're wondering what happened next, if they chased me down, if they called security, if they wept or exploded or begged for forgiveness, you're not ready for what came before. Because this story doesn't start at the airport. It starts years earlier, with a teenage girl who just wanted to feel special for one day. A daughter who spent 16 years trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. A girl who learned early on that in her family, love had terms, and hers kept expiring. So if you're still here, buckle up, because this isn't just a story about a canceled flight. It's about the invisible damage parents can do without ever raising their voice, and what it takes to finally say, enough. To understand why I walked away, why I canceled those flights, you have to know what it was like growing up in my family. From the outside, we looked perfect. My mom, Carla, ran PTA meetings like corporate boardrooms. My dad, David, wore success like a uniform, polished shoes, expensive cologne, and a permanent Bluetooth headset attached to his ear like it was part of his anatomy. And my younger brother, Evan? He was the golden child, the pride of the Merrick name. Then there was me, Lena Merrick, the quiet one, the odd one out. The one always a little too sensitive, a little too intense, and a little too much. We lived in a big beige house in Charleston, The kind with perfectly trimmed hedges and a 2-car garage where no one ever parked because it was filled with bins labeled Thanksgiving decor and Christmas china. My mom believed in matching pajamas and photo-worthy traditions, but she also believed in appearances over authenticity. She could host a baby shower that looked like a Pinterest board, but when I cried in my room after being bullied in 6th grade, she told me to stop being dramatic and not let it ruin the mood. That was Carla. Love meant performance. Connection was currency, something you earned with perfection. And my dad? David was all about status. He talked to us like we were employees, not kids, not people. He hated conflict, but not because it made him uncomfortable. No, because it made him look bad. I remember one time I asked him if he was proud of me for finishing my art portfolio. He just looked at me and said, "Are you making any money with it?" That was the end of that conversation. Still, for a while, I convinced myself that maybe this was normal. Maybe all families were like this, quiet and surface level, where love was implied but never spoken, where you celebrated wins only if they made a good Facebook post, where the rules changed depending on who you were. Because here's the thing, the rules were different for Evan. Evan could do no wrong. He broke curfew? Boys will be boys. Got a C in chemistry? He's focusing on soccer right now. When I got an A- in biology, Carla literally said, "What happened to the plus?" Evan didn't even ask to be the golden child. It was just handed to him like everything else. And I didn't resent him, not exactly. I resented the way my parents bent the world around him and made me feel like a burden for needing anything they weren't ready to give. And yet, I tried. God, I tried. I remember baking my own birthday cupcakes in 8th grade because Mom forgot she had a hair appointment. I wrapped a gift to myself once, a book I had saved up for, just so I'd have something to open at the dinner table. When they asked who gave it to me, I said, "A friend." That friend was me. I wasn't unloved, I wasn't abused, but I was unseen. And in some ways, that kind of neglect is worse, because you keep doubting your own pain. You keep asking yourself, am I overreacting? And every time I did speak up, every time I tried to explain how left out I felt, they'd say, "We're doing our best," or "Don't guilt us," or the classic, "We've given you everything." Everything except acknowledgement. So I stopped asking. I shrank into myself, became the easy child, the one who handled her own problems, didn't make waves, didn't need reminders. I got straight A's, skipped grades, never smoked, never partied. I was the dream kid, on paper, and invisible in real life. And that's the thing. You can only be invisible for so long before something inside you starts to scream. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned to celebrate myself quietly, in stolen moments, journal entries, and whispered affirmations. I kept hoping that one day they'd notice, that one day they'd finally look at me and see me. That day never came. Instead, what came, at the most vulnerable, most defining moment of my adolescence, was a betrayal disguised as a family trip. But I'll get to that. All you need to know right now is this. I loved my family. I needed them. I kept showing up over and over, waiting for them to choose me the way they always chose Evan. They never did. And that's when things began to shift. Looking back, I don't think my family ever intended to hurt me, but intention doesn't undo impact. And in my house, the impact was always clear. Love came with terms. The dysfunction wasn't loud or violent. It didn't look like the stories you read online. It was quiet, polished, polite, but deeply corrosive. It was in the way my mother, Carla, only praised me if it helped her look good in front of her friends. If I won something, an essay contest, a scholarship, she'd smile proudly and say, "Well, I did read to her every night when she was little," as if my success were a reflection of her dedication. If I ever failed, emotionally, academically, socially, the silence was deafening. It was in the way my father treated emotions like stains, something to clean up quickly and never speak of again. If I cried during dinner, I was sent to my room. Not because I was in trouble, but because, in his words, "This isn't the time or place for dramatics." He'd say it like he was doing me a favor. And it was in the way they both handled Evan, like he was the prize, the joy, the one who just fit into the life they wanted to show the world. Evan didn't try to be the golden child. He just was. It came naturally. He was athletic, funny, laid back, and always knew how to charm people. I don't blame him for that. But I do blame my parents for acting like he was the only one worth noticing. If Evan broke something in the house, it was boys being boys. If I left my shoes by the door, it was disrespectful and lazy. If Evan forgot a family member's birthday, it was, he's got a lot on his plate. If I forgot to respond to a group text, I got called self-absorbed. My brother got attention. I got expectations. And birthdays? They were the hardest. Every year, it was the same. Evan would get a full-blown party, themed cakes, balloons, a whole event. My birthdays were quiet family dinners, just us. Always with an excuse. This year's been tight. Or you didn't say you wanted a party. Or let's just do something small this time. The message was always the same. Don't expect too much. I used to tell myself I didn't care. I even said it out loud. I'm not a birthday person. But that was a lie. I am a birthday person. I love the idea of carving out one day a year to celebrate just being alive. But I learned early on that if I wanted that kind of joy, I'd have to give it to myself, quietly, without asking for permission. The older I got, the more I noticed the little ways they tried to control me. When I applied to a college out of state, my father told me I was being ridiculous and ungrateful. He said, "Why would you leave when you have everything here?" When I cut my hair short in college, my mother said I looked unstable. That word stuck with me for weeks. She didn't ask why I cut it. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She just decided it meant something wrong. Even the things I loved, art, writing, anything creative, were treated like hobbies. Not serious, not worth investing in. One time, I stayed up all night painting a canvas for a school project. My teacher gave me a perfect grade and asked to display it in the front hallway. I was so proud I brought it home that weekend. Carla took one look at it and said, "It's interesting, but it's not something we'd hang in the living room." I still remember how her words sank in. Not loud, just sharp enough to bruise. The dysfunction wasn't about what they said. It was about what they never said. They never said, "I'm proud of you," without a caveat. They never said, "I'm sorry." They never said, "You matter." But they did say things like, "Don't bring this up right now. You're being dramatic. You know Evan has a lot going on. You're too emotional." That's just how families work. And for a long time, I believed them. I believed I was too emotional. I believed that maybe I was the problem. That maybe if I could just be easier, quieter, more agreeable, then they'd love me the way they loved Evan. But no matter how small I made myself, it was never enough. And then came the day I realized they weren't just forgetting me. They were actively replacing me. It was a few weeks before my 16th birthday, and that's when everything began to unravel. I had been planning my 16th birthday since I was 14. Not because I wanted some over-the-top party or piles of gifts. I just wanted one day. One day where I wasn't an afterthought. One day where I was chosen, celebrated, acknowledged. I had saved screenshots of cake designs on my phone. I had a folder of playlists labeled Sweet 16 Vibes. I even wrote a guest list, 10 girls from school, some cousins, and a quiet spot at the beach where we could eat, dance, and take photos as the sun went down. For once, I let myself believe they'd show up for me. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not like they did for Evan, with banners and a DJ and catered food, but enough. Just enough. 3 weeks before the date, I sat down with Carla at the kitchen counter. I had it all laid out, my ideas, the budget I calculated, even a handwritten plan for transportation and cleanup. I tried to make it easy for her to say yes. She glanced at the paper, pursed her lips, and said, "We'll talk about it later. I have a nail appointment." I waited. I kept reminding her. Each time, she said, "We'll see." Then, 1 week before my birthday, I walked into the kitchen and saw Carla and David standing by the island with a laptop open and their passports out. I knew that look. I knew the tone. It was the trip planning tone. Efficient. excited, exclusive. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Carla turned to me like I'd just walked in on something private. She blinked, paused, and then said it, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're going to Jackson Hole for the week. It's kind of a family reset trip." I stared at her. "But that's my birthday weekend." David didn't even look up from his screen. "This trip was the only time we could get a good deal. We'll celebrate when we get back." I stood there, waiting for them to say, "Just kidding," or "Of course we'll do something special before we go," or "We'll bring your friends along." But they didn't. They just went back to planning. "Evan has his fencing tournament up there," Carla added, like that somehow explained it. "It'll be a great family moment." Family moment. The words felt like ice. I had spent months planning something that mattered to me, and in one breath they replaced it with a tournament that wasn't even mine. And the worst part? They didn't even remember my birthday. They didn't cancel my party to make a point. They just forgot it altogether. That night I cried in my room with the door locked, the music turned up to drown out the ache in my chest. I deleted the playlists. I threw away the sketches I made of the party setup. I told my friends it was postponed. I pretended it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered so much that something inside me cracked. On the actual day of my 16th birthday, I sat in a hotel bathroom in Wyoming, eating trail mix from a vending machine, while Evan laughed on the phone with his coach, and my parents clinked wine glasses downstairs. They didn't say happy birthday until dinner, when Carla handed me a hotel envelope with a $25 Starbucks gift card and said, "We didn't have time to shop, but we'll do something once we get back, okay?" They never did. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just overlooked. I was expendable. And for the first time, I stopped blaming myself for it. I stopped thinking I was ungrateful. I stopped thinking I was too sensitive. I stopped thinking that maybe if I had just been a little more like Evan, they would have loved me better. Number. The truth was uglier and simpler. They only showed up for what reflected well on them. And I, in that moment, was invisible. It's strange how birthdays, the day that's supposed to be yours, can become the moment you feel most alone. That was the year I learned how much it hurt to be erased by the people who gave you life. And once you feel that kind of hollow, something in you doesn't go back to sleep. It waits. It watches. And eventually, it wakes up. Something changed in me after that trip. At first, it wasn't loud. There were no confrontations, no screaming matches, no grand declarations of anger. I didn't storm out of the hotel or throw my gift card back at them. That wasn't my style. And besides, I'd already learned that expressing emotion in my house only made things worse. So I smiled. I said thank you. I let my mom take a photo of me at dinner holding a slice of cheesecake with one candle in it, a photo she captioned, "Our girl is 16 today, feeling grateful for time together." I remember reading that caption and feeling like I was looking at someone else's life. I wasn't their girl. I was their background character, their accessory. We flew home 2 days later. No one mentioned my birthday again. It faded like so many other forgotten things in my family, into the void of not a big deal. But it was a big deal to me, and not just because of that one day. It was the realization that my parents didn't forget on accident. They forgot because they didn't make space for me, not in their minds, not in their hearts, and definitely not in their plans. After that, I stopped bringing things up. I stopped sharing ideas. I stopped asking to be included. That trip killed something in me. Not love, I still loved them even then, but hope. The hope that one day they'd turn to me and say, "We see you. You matter to us." When that hope died, it didn't go quietly. It twisted into something else, something heavy. I became quieter, more withdrawn. In school, I still performed well, still kept my head down, still checked every box, but I started feeling like I was on autopilot, like I was doing life instead of living it. I avoided conversations at dinner. I skipped family movie nights. I stayed late at school, or buried myself in art projects, because the silence I found in solitude hurt less than the silence I experienced at home. The weird thing was, no one noticed. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Carla would glance up from her tablet and say things like, "You're always so moody lately." David would chime in with, "Teenagers," and go back to his phone. That was the extent of their concern. They never asked what was really going on. They never looked me in the eye long enough to see how hollow I was becoming. That kind of emotional invisibility doesn't just wound you, it shapes you. I started second-guessing everything I felt. If I got excited about something, I'd immediately feel embarrassed. If I got sad, I'd shame myself for being weak. If someone complimented me, I assumed they were being polite. If someone criticized me, I believed them completely. I had internalized a truth I didn't yet have the language for, that my feelings were too big, too loud, too inconvenient. I became my own ghost. It wasn't just the birthday. It was what that birthday revealed, that I was a guest in my own family. There only when I didn't need too much, only when I didn't shine too brightly, only when I made their lives easier. And I wore that role like a second skin. I performed gratitude, I performed strength, I performed normalcy. Even around friends, I minimized it. I joked about having a Pinterest mom and a dad with a stick up his suit. I made it sound quirky, harmless. But deep down, I envied people whose parents showed up for them, not just physically, but emotionally. That envy turned into shame. And that shame turned into distance. By the time I graduated high school, I was already halfway gone. I didn't invite my parents to senior night at the art show. I told them it wasn't a big deal, just extra credit. The truth? I had 3 pieces featured, and the teacher handed me a certificate for most expressive portfolio. I stood on that small auditorium stage and looked out at the empty seat I'd saved, just in case someone came. No one did, and I remember thinking, maybe they never will. That thought stayed with me into college, into my first apartment, into the nights I'd lie awake wondering why I still hoped they'd call just to ask how I was. Not for a holiday, not for a family event, but just because they missed me. They never did. And so I kept building walls inside myself, layer by layer, year after year, until I barely recognized who I was behind them. But then, years later, something cracked through. A relationship, a betrayal, a mirror held up to everything I thought I'd buried. And that's when the real shift began. You don't wake up one day and suddenly decide you've had enough. That kind of clarity doesn't come all at once. It builds, slowly, quietly, like a tide creeping up until you realize you're already waist deep in the water, and if you don't start swimming, you're going to drown. For me, that tide began rising in my late 20s. I was 27, working a decent job at a local publishing house. On paper, my life looked fine. Stable apartment, decent salary, a boyfriend named Callum who everyone said I was lucky to have. But beneath the surface, I was unraveling. The unraveling didn't come with screaming or panic attacks. It came in smaller moments, subtle ones, like the way I'd freeze every time my mom's name lit up my phone, or how my stomach would drop whenever a text from my dad started with, "Just a reminder," like how I'd spend hours agonizing over what to say in a 3-sentence reply, terrified of sounding difficult or ungrateful. Callum once told me in the middle of a minor disagreement, "You act like everything's your fault. It's exhausting." And the thing was, he wasn't wrong. It was exhausting. Apologizing all the time, taking up as little space as possible, reading people's moods like survival maps. It was second nature by then, a deeply embedded survival skill from a childhood spent trying not to upset the balance of a house that never made room for me. That same year, a friend of mine, Maya, who later became one of my biggest lifelines, suggested I try therapy. At first, I laughed. "Therapy is for people with real problems," I said. But she looked at me, dead serious, and replied, "You do have real problems, Lena. You just got really good at pretending they weren't." That one sentence stuck in my throat for days. Eventually, I went, reluctantly, nervously. I remember sitting in that too-clean office, arms crossed, and telling the therapist, "I don't even know what I'm supposed to say." She smiled gently and said, "Just tell me what you've been taught to keep quiet." That cracked something open in me. Over the following months, I started unpacking the things I'd buried so deep, I forgot they were still bleeding. We talked about emotional neglect, family dynamics, the role of the scapegoat. She helped me name things I thought were just personality flaws, the perfectionism, the people-pleasing, the fear of being seen. I learned that I had spent my entire life managing my parents' comfort at the cost of my own, that I had never really been allowed to have boundaries, that my silence had been mistaken for stability, and that the anger I kept swallowing was a sign I'd been ignoring my own needs for too long. The realization wasn't immediate. It came in waves, but once it arrived, it was like putting on glasses for the first time. Everything that used to confuse me suddenly made sense. Like why Carla always dismissed my feelings but expected me to validate hers. Why David only called me mature when I didn't challenge him. Why birthdays hurt. Why silence felt safer than speaking up. One day in therapy, my counselor asked, what would it feel like to disappoint them? The question made my heart race. Disappoint them? That was my worst fear. But I sat with it. I imagined saying no, setting a boundary, choosing myself, even if it meant making them uncomfortable. And strangely, it didn't feel as terrifying as I thought. It felt like relief. From there, things started to shift in real time. I stopped replying to guilt texts right away. I said no to a Thanksgiving invitation and didn't explain why. I skipped Evan's engagement party and instead went hiking alone. That day in the woods, I remember looking at the sunlight breaking through the trees and thinking, this is what it feels like to breathe without earning it. I began showing up for myself in small, radical ways. I bought myself a birthday cake. I hung my own art in my apartment. I stopped pretending I didn't care. I started telling the truth, first to myself, then out loud. It didn't happen overnight. I still flinched every time my phone buzzed with their names. But slowly, I reclaimed pieces of myself I had long abandoned. And by the time I turned 29, I wasn't that scared 16-year-old anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to remember. I wasn't shrinking to fit. I was done auditioning for a role I never wanted to play. The old me would have said, maybe they didn't mean to hurt me. The new me knew. They still did. And I didn't need permission to protect myself anymore. Once you wake up, really wake up, there's no going back. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream at my parents or block them overnight. That's not how resistance looked for me. It was quieter, smarter, measured like chess, not like war. I started with no. No to holidays that felt fake. No to group chats where I was only expected to say, "Congrats, Evan," or "Great idea, Mom." No to flying home just to be ignored at a dinner table while they talked around me. The first big no came when I skipped Easter brunch. Carla had texted in her usual clipped tone, "Easter at Aunt Jean's, 11 a.m., bring a dessert. Evan and Kendra will be doing the egg hunt with the kids. No, would you like to join? No, how have you been?" Just an instruction. I stared at it for 5 minutes before replying, "Thanks, but I'm spending Easter on my own this year." Send. No explanation, no apology. The world didn't collapse. I didn't burst into flames. I went to a used bookstore that day, walked through the park with a coffee in hand, and listened to a podcast on self-worth. For the first time during a holiday, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. They didn't reply to my message. And that silence? It said everything. That was how I knew I was finally doing something right. Small boundaries became bigger ones. I didn't pick up calls when I wasn't emotionally available. I didn't send birthday texts to people who never remembered mine. I stopped volunteering information about my life they hadn't earned access to. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was just finally protecting myself. Then came the family trip. It was almost comical the way it happened. I hadn't heard from Carla or David in weeks, and then suddenly, out of the blue, I got a group text from both of them. "We've been thinking maybe it's time for a family vacation. Somewhere beautiful and peaceful. Italy, perhaps? A reset for all of us." I laughed out loud when I read it. It didn't say "we miss you." It didn't say "we're sorry." It didn't say "let's talk." Just a vague offer to reconnect, without accountability, without change, without even acknowledging the hurt that still sat between us like a loaded gun on the table. I almost deleted the message, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was my therapist's voice in my head. Or maybe it was the thought, what would it look like to say yes? But on my terms? So I said I'd go. I told them I'd handle the flights. I told them I could use my airline miles. I had plenty saved up. They were thrilled, of course. So generous, Lena, Carla replied. David added a thumbs up. What they didn't know? I booked 3 tickets, 1 in my name, 2 in theirs. All fully refundable, all under my account, all controllable by me, and I didn't do it to manipulate. I did it because I needed to know I could walk away if I needed to. I wasn't sure I would, but I wanted the option. That's what healing had taught me. Real power is quiet, and boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about clarity. As the trip approached, the old patterns crept in. Carla texted me a packing list I didn't ask for. David sent me a Google Doc with an itinerary. Neither asked how I was feeling. Neither asked what I wanted to see in Italy. It was all planned, as if I was just tagging along for someone else's vacation. 3 nights before our flight, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, they haven't changed. They've just shifted the setting. That was when I realized they didn't want reconciliation. They wanted compliance. They wanted a photo album, not a relationship. And I wasn't going to give them that anymore. So I made a plan. I would meet them at the airport. I would smile, play along, carry my own luggage, walk right up to the gate. And then, when the moment came, I would choose myself again. And this time, it wouldn't just be a missed holiday or a skipped call. This time, I was going to make it unforgettable, the way they made my 16th birthday unforgettable. Only now, I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to choose me. I was choosing me. We arrived at the airport around 7:45 a.m. The energy was exactly what I expected. Carla was complaining about the parking garage. David was checking his watch like we were late, even though we had hours until boarding. I walked a few steps behind them, dragging my carry-on across the smooth tile floor, and I swear I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the rolling wheels. Everything was so normal, and that's what made it feel surreal. They were talking about Rome's weather, what restaurants we should try, how Evan and Kendra were jealous they couldn't come. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just casual entitlement, like we were a happy family about to go make memories. If you'd looked at us, you'd never guess that 2 of us were playing a game and only 1 of us knew it. We passed through security, sat at the gate. Carla took a photo of her latte and posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Italy, here we come." I watched her filter it 3 times before hitting post. David was on the phone, barking something about a client back in Charleston. And me? I was calm, unshakably, eerily calm. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. I felt clear. I excused myself to go to the restroom. Instead, I walked to a window near another gate. From there, I could still see ours. I could see them. Still scrolling, still talking, still completely unaware. I pulled out my phone and opened the airline app. My account, my booking, their 2 seats. The little cancel button waited like a dare. And I knew what some people might say. Why not talk to them? Why not have a real conversation? But that's the thing. I had. For years. With silence. With emotional absences. With shrinking myself smaller and smaller in the hopes that maybe they'd notice. I'd begged in 100 different ways for them to just see me. They never did. So this wasn't petty. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. One they would finally have to feel. I hit cancel. It took less than 5 seconds. Then I opened our group chat, the same one they'd used to send trip updates, packing lists, and brag about Evan's engagement party I hadn't been invited to. I typed exactly 20 words. You canceled my birthday for a family trip. Today, I canceled your trip for my peace. Send. I turned off my phone. Not airplane mode. Not do not disturb. I powered it off. I stood there for a second. Waiting. Not for their reaction, I wasn't going back to see it, but for something inside me to shift. And it did. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't relief. It was something deeper, like exhaling for the first time in years. I walked straight out of the terminal. No looking back, no dramatic exit. Just the steady rhythm of my footsteps, like a beat I was finally keeping for myself. Outside, the sky was overcast but bright, the kind of soft morning light that makes everything feel strangely cinematic. I climbed into the back seat of a waiting rideshare, something I'd pre-scheduled the night before, and asked the driver to take me to the cafe I loved downtown. No luggage to check, no ticket to scan, no more pretending. And somewhere, behind me, at gate 22B, Carla and David were realizing that the version of me they knew, the quiet daughter, the agreeable tag-along, didn't exist anymore. I don't know what they said when they saw the message. I don't know if they argued, or panicked, or turned on each other. Maybe they blamed me. Maybe they sat in silence, stunned that someone they had underestimated for so long finally drew a line they couldn't cross. And that's the power of quiet resistance. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just chose myself. In the same way they had chosen themselves over and over, when they forgot my birthday, when they skipped my art show, when they left me alone in that hotel bathroom at 16. This was my moment, not of revenge, but of clarity. A message delivered not in anger, but in truth. And when the driver asked, "How's your morning going?" I just smiled and said, "Better than it used to." After the airport, I didn't go home. I went to my favorite cafe, a place tucked away on a side street downtown, with warm lighting, mismatched chairs, and watercolor paintings lining the walls. It was a place I used to come when I needed to breathe, to think, to remember I still existed outside of other people's expectations. That morning I walked in and asked for a table by the window. Alone. The hostess didn't blink. She just smiled and handed me a menu. I sat down, set my phone on the table, still powered off, and ordered the same thing I always did, a lavender chai and lemon ricotta pancakes. As I waited, I looked out the window and watched people pass, parents with strollers, someone walking a dog, a couple arguing quietly. Life, moving on. No one knew what I'd just done. No one knew I had just walked away from a lifetime of playing a role I didn't choose. And that's what made it beautiful. It wasn't a performance. There was no applause, no audience. Just me, sitting in the aftermath of a boundary I had finally enforced. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. The pancakes arrived, golden, imperfect, dusted with powdered sugar, and I took the first bite slowly. That's when it hit me. It was my birthday. 29. Not the official date, but close enough. And for the first time since I was a kid, I felt present on my own birthday. No anxiety, no pretending, no waiting for anyone else to make it feel special. It was mine. After breakfast, I pulled out the small sketchbook I always carried. The pages were filled with fragments, half-drawn faces, incomplete florals, lines of poetry I never finished. But that morning, I opened to a blank page and started to draw with purpose. At first, it was simple, a girl walking away from an airport, a tiny suitcase behind her, wind in her hair. But the more I drew, the more it came alive. Behind her, the terminal burned. Not violently, just a soft, dreamlike flame, like the kind you see in animated films. And above her, the words, "She didn't set the fire. She just stopped trying to put it out." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I wrote it again, smaller, at the bottom of the page, like a whisper just for me. Later, I posted it to my art account online. No context, no caption, just the image. Within an hour, it had more engagement than anything I'd ever posted. People wrote things like, "This is how healing looks." I felt this in my soul. I just walked away from my mother, and this gave me peace. I hadn't even shared the story, just the symbol, and that was enough. That drawing wasn't just a piece of art. It was a declaration, a timestamp, a quiet, steady yes to myself. After I paid the bill, I wandered into a little bookstore next door, bought a new journal. The cover was navy blue with the words, "Trust Your Voice," embossed in gold. I didn't need a party. I didn't need a balloon arch, or a cake, or even a chorus of people singing off-key. What I needed was exactly what I gave myself. Space, stillness, a seat at my own table. That day, that simple, symbolic, delicious day, was everything I had been denied at 16. Not just the celebration, but the acknowledgement. And I gave it to myself. That's the thing no one tells you about healing. It's not always fireworks and breakthroughs. Sometimes it's pancakes and silence and the sketch that feels like closure. Sometimes it's realizing you don't need your parents to validate your growth for it to be real. Sometimes symbolic victory isn't about what you take away from others. It's about what you finally give back to yourself. And sitting there, full, warm, and at peace, I didn't feel broken or bitter. I felt whole. Later that afternoon, I turned my phone back on. No explosions, no frantic voicemails, just 4 unread texts from Carla, each more frantic and confusing than the last. What is going on? Why would you do this? We're at the gate. They're saying it's been canceled. Fix this now. Lena, we are not playing games. I didn't reply. I didn't owe them an explanation they wouldn't understand. Not anymore. Instead, I opened my messages from Maya, my best friend since college, the one person who had witnessed the slow unraveling of my family illusion and never once asked me to shrink for her comfort. I sent her a picture of the sketch I'd drawn, the one with the airport, the flames and the girl walking away. She replied in less than a minute. "You did it. I'm crying. I'm proud of you. Want me to come over?" I didn't have to say yes. She already knew. 2 hours later, she showed up at my apartment with Thai food, a bottle of wine, and her impossibly soft sweatshirt that I always accidentally ended up keeping for weeks. She didn't ask for details. She just wrapped me in a hug and whispered, "You didn't do anything wrong. You chose yourself. That's survival, not sabotage." And that's the thing about the people who get it. They don't need the full backstory to hold space for your freedom. We ate on the couch, watched an old cartoon movie we loved from college, and halfway through, she paused it just to say, "Your parents aren't capable of giving you what you needed, but you are, and so are we." We. It wasn't just her. That weekend, I told Tariq, the guy I had been seeing for the last 6 months. We weren't serious yet, but he was kind, present, safe in ways I hadn't even known I needed. I told him what happened. Not all of it, but enough. The trip, the text, the why. He didn't flinch. He didn't call it dramatic. He didn't ask why I didn't just talk to them. He just nodded and said, "You didn't cancel their trip. You canceled their access. Big difference." That line, canceling their access, sat in my chest like a truth I hadn't found the words for. He got it, without me needing to over-explain or justify. Later that night, he surprised me by showing up with a single cupcake and a candle. "I know it's not your birthday," he said, "but I also know what it feels like to reclaim something that was stolen. So this is for that." I didn't cry, but I could have. I'd spent so long believing birthdays had to be lonely. He made it feel easy. Over the next few days, more people reached out, people who saw my sketch, people who didn't know the full story but saw something in it, a whisper of their own lives reflected back at them. Friends from college messaged me, "This is exactly how I felt after cutting off my dad. Your art keeps saying what I'm too afraid to say out loud. Thank you for making something beautiful out of something painful." Even my cousin Riley, who I hadn't spoken to in months, texted me after seeing the post. "I always wondered why you seemed distant at family stuff. I get it now. I'm sorry we weren't closer. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." It wasn't some movie moment. It wasn't a rescue. It was connection, honest, grounding, and real. And it reminded me that family isn't built from blood. It's built from consistency, consent, and care. The people who stayed in my life, Maya, Tariq, a few good friends, and eventually even some distant relatives, they didn't ask me to explain the scar. They just sat with me while it healed. And that's what I needed. Not a fixer. Not a savior. Just people who could say, I see you, and mean it. Because when you grow up constantly trying to earn love, finding people who love you without performance is like breathing fresh air after a lifetime underground. And it gave me the courage to keep going, not toward them, but toward me. I didn't plan to expose them. That was never my goal. For so long, I thought my silence was a form of protection. For them, for me, for the illusion of family I still clung to like a splintered raft. But when I stopped performing, when I stopped covering for them, the truth started rising on its own. It didn't need a spotlight. It just needed me to stop holding it underwater. It started with a phone call from Aunt Jean. I hadn't heard from her in years, not since a Thanksgiving where she'd pulled me aside and said, "You're always so composed. Your mother must be proud." Back then, I didn't have the words to tell her I wasn't composed. I was just emotionally starved and terrified of being too much. Now, her name flashed on my screen. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was soft, tentative. "Lena, I heard something happened at the airport." I didn't say much, just confirmed that yes, I had canceled the flights. Yes, I had done it deliberately. No, I wasn't having a meltdown. I was done being mistreated. There was a long pause. Then she sighed and said, "Honestly, I'm not surprised." That caught me off guard. She went on, "Your mom has always rewritten things. We all saw it, but no one wanted to challenge her. And your father, well, he just nods and lets her lead. But that doesn't mean the rest of us were blind." It was the first time someone in the family had ever acknowledged what I had lived with. My voice caught in my throat. For a second, I couldn't speak. She continued, "I remember when you were little. You used to draw me pictures and tell me you were going to have an art show one day. But at every family gathering, it was always Evan's soccer this, Evan's awards that. I always wondered why no one asked you how school was. I didn't realize how badly I'd needed to hear that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't just being sensitive." Later that week, my cousin Riley texted again. "So, what's the real story behind the canceled trip?" I told her a version of the truth. Not the full saga, but enough. The forgotten birthday, the pattern, the build-up, the final straw. She responded, "Honestly, that tracks. Carla's always acted like she was auditioning for a reality show. No room for anyone else's spotlight." Word started to spread, not in a scandalous way, but in quiet circles. My sketch had gained traction, and with it came comments and shares. Some of them reached people in my extended family. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. But the timing was obvious. The message was clear. And my parents, well, they noticed. Carla texted me a few days later. "Not sure why you're trying to embarrass us publicly. Very childish. If you have a problem, be an adult and call." I didn't reply, because I wasn't trying to embarrass them. I was simply refusing to keep their version of the story alive. The one where we were a perfect, polished family. Where I was the difficult daughter, always withdrawing, always holding grudges. I wasn't holding a grudge. I was holding the truth. The more I stood in that truth, the more their control started to slip. The narrative they'd crafted for years, that I was just the sensitive one, the moody artist, the black sheep, it didn't hold up when people saw me now, grounded, direct, calm. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't blaming. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was just done lying. And the people around us? They noticed. Slowly, subtly, their posture toward me began to shift. A few more cousins reached out. An old neighbor commented on one of my posts. "I always wondered why you weren't around at holidays. I thought maybe you'd moved away. Glad you're speaking up." None of it was dramatic. No confrontations at family events. No massive fallout. Just quiet exposure. The kind that happens when you stop hiding. When you stop making excuses for people who never made space for your pain. And when Carla and David realized they couldn't control the narrative anymore, that I wasn't afraid of what people would think, something in them changed too. Not in a way that brought reconciliation, but in a way that made one thing finally, unmistakably clear. They couldn't rewrite me anymore. For most of my life, I believed being a good daughter meant sacrificing myself. Not in grand, heroic ways, but in small, steady acts of erasure, nodding when I disagreed, staying quiet when I hurt, shrinking my needs so I wouldn't be too much. I was conditioned to see love as something earned by obedience. I mistook tolerance for care, control for protection, silence for peace. And for years I bent myself to their version of who I was supposed to be. Grateful, polished, emotionally manageable. But here's what I know now. Being good for them meant being gone for me. I had to choose. I chose me. That wasn't a reckless act. It wasn't emotional warfare. It was a boundary. One I should have drawn years ago. And once I did, the guilt that had haunted me, the guilt they had quietly nurtured in me since childhood, began to fall away. Because the truth is, I don't owe anyone my loyalty just because they raised me. Love without respect is not love. Family without emotional safety is not home. And I refuse to keep performing in a relationship where I am only welcome if I keep betraying myself. My moral resolution isn't complicated. It's simple, but not easy. I will no longer apologize for choosing peace. I don't need their approval to make my decisions. I don't need their validation to define my reality. And I certainly don't need their version of love if it comes with conditions that silence my spirit. For a long time, I feared setting boundaries would make me selfish. But I've come to understand, boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're doors I choose who to open to, and on what terms. I haven't spoken to my parents since the airport. They sent one more email. It was long, cold, defensive. No apology. Just accusations that I had embarrassed them, that I had chosen bitterness, that they tried their best, that if I really wanted to grow up, I would have kept things private. But here's what I've learned. The people who demand silence are almost always protecting the version of themselves they show the world, not the damage they caused behind closed doors. I didn't respond. I don't plan to. Because engaging with people who refuse to self-reflect is not maturity. It's emotional labor disguised as duty. And I've done my share of that. Now, I live by a different compass. I value honesty over harmony, clarity over comfort, healing over legacy, and myself above all else. That last part was the hardest to learn. For years, I believed that self-prioritization was selfish. But now I know, it's survival. It's power. It's the only way I could become who I really am. People sometimes ask me if I miss them. The truth? I miss the idea of them. I miss the version of my parents I created in my mind. The ones who would show up, listen, apologize, evolve. But I don't miss who they really were. And I certainly don't miss who I had to become around them. I don't hate them. I'm not angry anymore. I feel clear. I've done the work. I've faced the memories. I've sat with the grief. And in doing so, I discovered that closure doesn't come from their apology. It comes from me choosing to stop waiting for it. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the chapter where I stop letting someone else hold the pen. Because when you grow up feeling invisible, learning to fully see yourself is a kind of spiritual awakening. Now, I don't celebrate my birthday with cake and people who forget. I celebrate it with rituals that remind me I'm here, alive, valuable, worthy of joy. A letter to myself, a day offline, a solo dinner. A reminder that I never needed a party to be celebrated. I just needed to believe I was worth celebrating. That's my moral resolution. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not even revenge. Just this. I exist on my own terms now. And no one, not even the people who raised me, gets to rewrite that. After everything, the airport, the silence, the healing, I didn't just want to move on. I wanted to build something new, something that belonged only to me. Not a version of life shaped by guilt or obligation, but a life rooted in truth, joy, and self-respect. The first thing I did was take my art seriously. For years it had been a side note, something I loved, but never claimed as mine. My parents always called it a hobby, and for a while, I believed them. But art was never just about pretty pictures. It was how I processed the things I couldn't say out loud, the things they told me were too much, the feelings they told me to get over. Now I let it lead me. I turned my sketch into a series, each piece focused on emotional milestones, cutting ties, reclaiming identity, choosing peace. I posted them to my social accounts under my real name for the first time. I stopped hiding. One post, then another, and people responded. Hundreds, then thousands. Not just with likes, but with paragraphs. Stories from women, men, queer kids, adult children, survivors, all saying the same thing. I thought I was the only one. I wasn't a licensed therapist or a self-help guru. I was just a woman telling the truth through lines and ink and color. And somehow, that truth reached people in ways I never imagined. So I started a small business, Braver Studio, a place for art, healing, and community. I sold prints, designed journals, created reflection prompts, even launched a weekly email called Quiet Wins, reminders that growth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It wasn't about becoming famous or rich. It was about becoming real. About building a future from my own voice, not the silence I was raised in. Outside of work, I started doing things I'd never allowed myself to enjoy before. Things that felt indulgent, but weren't. Things like taking long walks without checking my phone, saying no without explaining myself, rewatching animated movies I loved as a kid, hosting a small birthday brunch just for me and the few people who knew the real story. One morning I even booked a solo trip to a coastal town in Maine. I'd never traveled alone before. My parents always said it was unsafe. But standing on that windy shoreline with no one to perform for, no one to impress, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. And I wasn't alone. Tariq and I grew closer, slowly, gently. He wasn't trying to fix me. He just listened. He remembered my stories, asked good questions, and didn't flinch when I talked about the hard things. He once told me, "I love that you don't try to be okay when you're not. It makes the real you easier to hold." I didn't need him to save me, but he reminded me what it felt like to be held, emotionally, without condition. My circle stayed small. Maya, always steady, a few artist friends, a local grief group I joined, not just for family estrangement, but for anyone who lost something that still had a pulse. Because estrangement is grief. It's mourning the mother who never mothered, the father who always felt far away, the birthdays that turned into reminders of absence. But grief isn't just pain. It's also clarity. And eventually, peace. And from that peace, I began to write new rules. I do not chase love that makes me disappear. I do not confuse silence with safety. I do not attend gatherings where I'm only there to fill a photo. I do not lower my volume to be digestible. This is what rebuilding looks like. Not a Pinterest-perfect apartment or a flashy comeback. Just steady, rooted, honest growth. Some days I still feel the sting. I still wonder what it would be like to have parents who showed up, who said, "I'm sorry," who looked at my art and said, "We were wrong." But I've stopped waiting, because I don't need their permission to bloom. I've already begun. It happened on a Tuesday. I got home from the studio late, tired, paint under my nails, my satchel full of receipts and sticky notes. I kicked off my shoes, started a kettle, and saw the envelope on my doormat. No name on the front. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Carla. My first instinct was to throw it away. My second was to open it just enough to check for manipulation. I didn't do either, not right away. I sat with it for a while, let it rest on the counter like a ghost that had wandered in, unsure whether it was welcome. Eventually, I opened it. Inside was a card, the kind you get at a drugstore. Simple floral design, blank inside except for a single sentence written in pen. "I hope you're doing well. That's it. No love, Mom. No, we miss you. No, I'm sorry. Just 7 words and silence. I stared at it longer than I'd admit. Part of me wanted to be furious at the laziness, the vagueness, the absence of responsibility. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, felt something else. Not forgiveness, not connection, just awareness. They were still trying to reach me the only way they knew how, with minimal emotional effort. It wasn't what I needed. It wasn't enough. But it was something. A flicker. A tap on a door that had been firmly shut. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because I was still choosing peace. And opening the door, even a crack, wasn't something I'd do out of guilt or curiosity. It would only happen if, and only if, it felt safe. The boundary stays. But boundaries aren't walls. They're rules for access. And access can change when behavior changes, when truths are acknowledged, when apologies are real and accountability lives beyond words. So far, that hasn't happened. A few weeks later, Evan texted. He never really took sides, which in itself was a choice, but this time he sent something simple. I heard about your art. It's really powerful. I'm sorry for how things were when we were younger. I don't think I understood what you went through. I didn't expect that, and I didn't need him to fix anything. I just needed someone to say they saw it, that I wasn't imagining it, that the silence was heavy, and I carried more of it than I should have alone. I replied, "Thanks for saying that. It means more than you know." We didn't become best friends overnight. We didn't dive into weekly calls, but we exchanged a few more texts, shared a playlist. It was small, tentative, but mutual. I think that's what real reconciliation looks like, if it ever arrives. Not fanfare, not dramatic reunions, but a soft reweaving. One thread at a time. With my parents? I don't know. Maybe one day Carla will send another card. Maybe one day David will say more than, "We did our best." Maybe they won't. That's their choice. But the important thing is this. Now I have a choice too. Before, I would have opened the door wide just for a breadcrumb. I would have ignored my gut to keep the peace. I would have told myself any attention was better than none. Not anymore. Now I protect my peace with the same fierce love I spent years wishing they'd show me. If they come back, really come back, with honesty and effort, the door isn't locked, but it's not automatic either. They'll have to knock, and I'll decide if I answer. Because this version of me, the one who honors her story, who builds a life in truth, who no longer shrinks to fit, she's not going anywhere. And she's not opening the door for ghosts. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did, if I regret canceling the flights, if I regret not giving my parents one more chance, if I regret choosing peace over tradition, truth over politeness, myself over them. And the honest answer? Number, I don't regret any of it. Because what I lost that day at the airport, their approval, their version of the story, their control over me, was never truly mine to begin with. And what I gained was something I'd been chasing my entire life. Agency. I didn't burn the bridge between us. I just stopped carrying the entire weight of it on my shoulders. I stopped being the only one holding it up. Closure isn't about making everything neat. It's not a bow tied around pain. It's not forgiveness if the harm hasn't stopped. It's not a final conversation with your parent that magically heals you. Sometimes closure looks like making your own breakfast on your birthday and feeling content. Sometimes it looks like turning off your phone without guilt. Sometimes it's a drawing, a walk, a cup of tea, or an honest no. And sometimes closure is a quiet morning where you don't feel like a problem to be solved. You just feel like a person, safe in your own presence. That's the kind of closure I've built. Slowly, with love, with grief, with boundaries I once thought made me a bad daughter, but now understand, made me a whole woman. I didn't get the apology. I didn't get the family vacation redemption arc. I didn't get the moment where they looked me in the eye and said, "We're sorry we forgot you." but I got something else. I got me. The me who trusts her voice. The me who no longer panics when someone is disappointed. The me who knows she doesn't have to explain her boundaries for them to be valid. The me who gives herself what she was always waiting for from others. Love, time, attention, celebration, gentleness. That's what this story is really about. Not revenge, not conflict, but reclamation. Taking back the narrative from people who mishandled it. Reclaiming your name after others called you difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. Reclaiming your worth after it was buried under years of favoritism, gaslighting, and silence. And I know I'm not alone. I know there are people watching this who've spent their whole lives trying to be good enough for a parent who just couldn't see them, who've been told they're selfish for needing space, cold for cutting contact, too emotional for naming the truth. To you, I want to say this. You are not selfish. You are not broken. You are not too much. You were just raised in a system that benefited from your silence. And choosing yourself now isn't betrayal. It's healing. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they share your blood. You owe yourself the life you were always meant to have. One where you are seen, heard, and honored. And if your story looks like mine, if you're standing at your own metaphorical gate, holding the power to walk away, I hope you know, it's okay to go. It's okay to protect your peace. It's okay to build something better without the people who hurt you. You don't need a dramatic finale. You just need to trust that walking away from what harms you is not the end of love. It's the beginning of real love. The kind you give yourself. The kind you create in community. The kind that doesn't ask you to disappear to deserve it. I'll leave you with this. When I was 16, I sat in a hotel bathroom on my birthday, eating trail mix, wondering if I mattered. When I was 29, I canceled a trip, bought myself pancakes, and said out loud, I matter now. And I always did. So do you. If you've ever had to choose yourself, even when it meant walking away from family, share in the comments, or tell your story. You never know who you'll help feel seen. You are not alone, and your peace is worth protecting.